You know, in sports, sometimes they say, never look too far ahead to your next opponent. Focus on the here and now. What's going on this week? In fantasy, you can throw that all out the window. We do what we want. We need to plan ahead for the future and be prepared because the guys who are going to be those hot waiver wire pickups, you want on your bench now, not when everybody else is fighting for them. It's time to beat the breakout and identify those guys that you want to stash and pick up off waivers before they become hot commodities. Now, before I get to the players, let me also remind you, if you're in a typical non-superflex or 2 QB league where you only need one quarterback starting, you really don't have to roster a backup quarterback, and most of the time, you really don't need a backup tight end. Look, anybody that you have stashed on your bench, you could just pick up off waivers if you really need to. And if you have one of those top players at the position, you don't need that backup tight end or quarterback taking up a spot. Grab one of these guys instead. And please, please don't tell me if you have a backup kicker or defense on your bench. I don't want to know. So let's start with a running back that makes a very smart ad right now. Look, in Chicago, it seems like Khalil Herbert is the number one back, but they're not just going to go with one running back. And you know, on passing downs, it's not going to be Herbert. More likely, it's going to be the rookie, Rashawn Johnson. Johnson probably isn't going to contribute a lot right away because not just that he's a rookie, but also, you know, this is a guy who's going to take some time to acclimate to the pro game. He didn't really get a lot of run even in college because he was stuck behind a pretty good running back named Bijan Robinson. But Johnson has that do-it-all ability. He's a bigger back. He can catch the ball really well. And I think that's what his role is going to be and his appeal in fantasy because Khalil Herbert, that's the one thing he just doesn't do very much of. In 30 games in the NFL, he has a total of 28 targets. Catching the ball is just not his thing. And he's not a bigger back. He's not going to be in there for pass protection either. So third downs, he's going to get replaced. Obvious passing situations and times where they're behind in game script, he's not going to be on the field. I think Johnson takes up a surprising amount of snaps as the season goes on. The veteran Deontay Foreman was brought in to potentially be the starter. He's been good, but he's been banged up. A lot of injuries throughout his career. It looks like he might be running behind Johnson. And in this preseason, Johnson has looked really good, like the physical back he is. Average 3.64 yards after contact per attempt. So that means he can get the job done even if he's grinding between the tackles. This is the type of player I can see becoming the lead back on his team eventually. So I like that he has got maybe a small amount of standalone value at times, but right now I'm going to stash him wherever possible because I think eventually he becomes the number one guy there. Looking for another running back stash? Well, let's go with a guy who's in Tennessee behind Derrick Henry, Tyjae Spears. Let me just get this out of the way. Spears is not a guy I was all over at all in the pre-draft process. I think he put up a lot of big numbers at Tulane, but again, the competition is the question mark there. And the fact that he has no ACL, also a question, but apparently it doesn't matter. Just talked about Rashawn Johnson, how he did after contact. Well, surprisingly, Spears, who's not a big guy, he led the NFL in the preseason, 4.73 yards after contact per rush attempt. Add in there 5.3 yards per carry. Looked like a stud. Now, again, it's the preseason. Maybe this doesn't matter because he's running with the backups and he's clearly well behind Derrick Henry. And so the amount of touches he gets, yeah, that's the question. But look, we're looking for a running back with upside who we can put on the bench. It's going to be someone who's a backup. It's going to be a handcuff type. He might be the highest end of handcuffs because Derrick Henry is that offense, and so if they need to replace him, Spears would potentially get a ton of touches. And it would be all Spears, really. There's no depth behind him at the running back position. It would be Julius Chestnut, who was an undrafted free agent from last year. And remember, Hassan Haskins was there. Well, he's on IR and in legal trouble. His time in the NFL is pretty much over. I mean, Spears does have a very good chance to be a guy that could be one of those sneaky league winners if something happens to Derrick Henry. But even if it doesn't, look, they're going to have to spell him at certain times. He's not going to be out there 100% of all the snaps. As much as we think he's just not human, there will be some times where Spears gives him a breather. I don't know if it's enough to say he's got standalone value, but he is a guy I think will make some noise. You want to grab him now. And then one more running back who I think could be a sneaky source of points if not only something happens to Joe Mixon, but also if Chris Evans just doesn't handle his business as the third down back. Chase Brown, rookie out of Illinois. Now, we've been talking all offseason about Mixon, has some serious concerns about how inefficient he was last year. It's not good when running back continues to age and his yards per carry continue to go down. Brown, obviously, the faster, the younger, and the more explosive back here, looked good, had some moments in the preseason, and he's got that athleticism. This guy ran a 4.440, but also has a burst score that ranked in the 95th percentile. Basically, he is what Mixon isn't. Now, I get it, Mixon's going to be the back until something happens, but something could very well happen, and Chase Brown could work his way into a role as a situational back. Not a prolific pass catcher in college, but he can do it. Caught 27 a year ago, and he's got pretty good hands, so maybe he takes over as the third down back as well. Now, somebody that you did hear us talk about months ago when we interviewed Matt Harmon before the NFL draft, a guy that Harmon absolutely loves, and we agree, and that is Jayden Reed in Green Bay. It's hard to know what to make of this Green Bay offense. So many new pieces, including the quarterback Jordan Love getting his first extended look as the starter. I think Love will be fine. He's shown out well so far. Now, as far as the receivers, well, Watson seems to be the clear number one guy there. Romeo Doubs is going to have a significant role. But Romeo Doubs might be in question for week one. He's had a hamstring injury that's kept him out of practice. And Jayden Reed is going to be, as it is, probably one of the starters working a lot in the slot anyways. At tight end, everyone loves Luke Musgrave, but he's a rookie tight end, not guaranteed to get a lot of targets. So Reed could have a role anyways. But look, if Doubs is out, we could see Reed step on the scene even sooner than expected. And then the biggest injury concern here right now is Cooper Kupp, who very questionable for week one. Cooper Kupp might be in question all season with a hamstring injury that could keep nagging. We'll see what happens there. But even besides that, what do the Rams have at receiver behind him? It's Van Jefferson, and then a lot of question marks. Ben Skoranek, who, let's face it, not really out there to gather a bunch of targets. There could be room for Puka Nacua, the very intriguing rookie, to make some waves. He looked great throughout training camp. He's got a bigger frame. This guy who could be an interesting red zone target for Matt Stafford. And if Kupp is out for any length of time, he's going to have to look elsewhere. Look, Puka might wind up being the guy that gets the majority of the targets. And I want to throw this out there as far as the Rams and their passing game. What might look to be a very bad thing might actually be a good thing for their receivers, assuming Matt Stafford is still something close to vintage Matt Stafford. So the first 5 weeks of the season, the Rams are going to face the Seahawks, the 49ers, the Bengals, the Colts, and the Eagles. I have a good feeling that in 4 of those 5 games at least, they might be on the lower end of the scoreboard. They might have to pass the ball a lot. That means it's going to benefit somebody among their receiving core. Van Jefferson, it seems like an obvious candidate. Maybe Tyler Higbee at tight end, but don't count out Nacua if he does show that he's ready for the NFL. And then let's say you're not thrilled with a tight end that you drafted because there's some guys towards the later end that just aren't that exciting, or you're just looking for an upside, or a guy who might make a splash right away and look like an intriguing streamer / starter. I'm going to go with Juwan Johnson, who wasn't drafted in every league. Now in New Orleans, you've got Chris Olave, who looks like he should be a stud receiver for years to come. Michael Thomas, who at one time was the best receiver in the league, but I don't really count on him staying healthy for very long. If he even is, I don't know. And then Rashid Shaheed, interesting, good vertical threat. He's also been banged up. No guarantee he's going to draw a lot of targets. There's definitely a path for a guy like Johnson to be a red zone target, to be one of their primary targets in general. Johnson scored 7 touchdowns last year, and that was with that kind of scary rotation of quarterbacks they had going on. Derek Carr, look, whatever you think of Carr, whether he's the answer or not, he is at least a guy who can get the ball to his receivers, and we know he has a history of being successful connecting with a tight end with Darren Waller when he was with the Raiders. Not saying Juwan Johnson is the next Darren Waller, but I'm saying Juwan Johnson has a path to maybe get to double-digit touchdowns, guy who could be a consistent starter every single week. As soon as if Michael Thomas does go down with injury or doesn't play, Johnson could soak up a lot of targets across the middle of the field. Those are some of the players that I'm actively trying to pick up and stash before they become hot commodities on the waiver wire. Don't forget, we got you covered with all the advice you need for week 1 of the fantasy season. Check out this playlist right here.